My footsteps echoed as I walked down the courthouse corridor. It was early morning, yet the building was already buzzing. People rushed with files in hand. Attorneys nodded at one another in passing. I, however, stood alone. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 29. For a year, I worked at a company called Sterling Enterprises. They labeled me an intern, yet my workload was no different than that of a full-time employee. I stayed until midnight, unpaid, for overtime. When I spoke up, they told me, "You're gaining experience. Don't complain." For months, I stayed silent. But each day of silence grew into a knot inside me. Eventually, I quit. I demanded my unpaid wages, but no answer came. That's why I'm here. I can't afford a lawyer, but I have my evidence. Just then, opposing counsel Rebecca Shaw appeared in the corridor. Her heels struck sharply against the floor. She approached me with a smirk of disdain. "You don't have a lawyer, do you?" she mocked. I lifted my chin. "No," I said, "but I have my voice." As I stepped into the courtroom, my heart raced. The room was small but heavy with tension. Faded flags lined the walls, and behind the judge's bench, the words, "In God We Trust," loomed in bold letters. Rebecca Shaw strode confidently to the front. She looked as if she'd already claimed victory. As she sat down at her table, she threw me a brief glance, her smirk dripping with arrogance. I pressed my file tightly against my chest and moved to the back. When Judge Harrison entered, everyone rose. Silence spread through the room like a blade. The clerk called the case, Olivia Carter versus Sterling Enterprises. The words lingered in the air. My name echoed louder than ever before. Rebecca spoke first, her voice steady and "Your Honor, the opposing party is unrepresented. Her claims are emotional, her evidence weak. My client denies all allegations." I drew a deep breath. "Your Honor, it's true I have no lawyer, but I have documents. And these records come directly from Sterling Enterprises' own system." I opened my file and laid the top chart on the table. This chart shows the overtime hours I worked. The codes beside them prove the data has not been altered. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge lifted his pen and studied me carefully. In that moment, one thought filled my mind. I will not be silenced anymore. Judge Harrison lowered his glasses and looked at me. "If the source of these documents is Sterling Enterprises' system, the originals can be requested," he said, jotting down notes with his pen. Rebecca leapt to her feet. "Your Honor, these records could have been tampered with. The plaintiff has no legal or technical expertise. Their reliability is questionable." I straightened my shoulders. "I may not be a lawyer, but I know how to work with documents. The charts carry hash codes. Any alteration would break them. The court can subpoena Sterling Enterprises servers for verification. I'm ready." A hush fell over the room. I could feel eyes fixed on me. Rebecca's smirk faltered, tension flickering across her face. The judge tapped his pen against the bench. "A subpoena will be issued. System records to be obtained." In that moment, a spark of triumph lit inside me. It was only the beginning, but the playing field had just leveled. Rebecca's words echoed in my head. "You have no lawyer." I answered silently, "But I have the evidence." The court recessed briefly. I splashed cold water on my face in the restroom. Looking into the mirror, I caught a faint smile on my lips. It wasn't fear, it was resilience. Rebecca appeared at the next sink, refreshing her lipstick. She didn't look at me directly, but her voice echoed through the mirror. "You've come prepared. But remember, this isn't theater." I dried my hands slowly. "You're right, I said. Theater ends with applause. Here, it ends with judgment. She snapped her purse shut and stormed out, her smirk gone. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just speaking for myself, I was speaking for everyone who'd been silenced. Back in the courtroom, the judge read a preliminary report. Sterling Enterprises log files indicate entries under the intern role on the cited dates, with data exported. Rebecca objected. This is merely preliminary, Your Honor. It creates bias. Judge Harrison set his pen down. Not biased curiosity. We'll review the originals when they arrive. Proceed. The silence that followed felt heavy, and one thought surged in me. The truth has started to speak. At the next session, a witness was called, Daniel Brooks. He had worked on the same projects with me for years, known for his honesty. When he took the stand, he looked nervous but determined. One night, while she was at her desk, I took a photo. The screen displayed 11:47 p.m. I later emailed that photo to her. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca sprang up. Objection. This is entirely subjective. Daniel locked eyes with her. Not subjective. The photo is here. The email records can verify it. The judge tapped his pen. Submit the photo and email records into evidence. Rebecca's face paled. She braced her hands on the table, but had no words left. I rose, my eyes fixed firmly on the judge. Your Honor, I said, policies may prohibit the truth, but the truth eventually reveals itself. And in that instant, I knew, for the first time, Rebecca Shaw was silent. By the third session, the courtroom was packed. The clerk delivered a preliminary server extract. Judge Harrison scanned it. There are intern logins and exports on the cited dates. Rebecca leaped up. That is not the full record. The judge nodded coolly. The full set is en route. This frames context. I spoke. Your Honor, here are the hash values. The same hashes appear on the company exports. Any tweak would break them. Rebecca snapped. Objection. Plaintiff isn't a technician. I shrugged. True. But the system that generated these codes is your server. A murmur rolled through the room. The judge tapped his pen. Court authorizes an on-site server examination. Color drained from Rebecca's face, and I thought, denial evaporates in front of logs. Rebecca shifted tactics, cross-examining Daniel. Why take that photo? Is it your job to expose co-workers? Daniel didn't flinch. When an unlawful practice occurs, documenting it is everyone's job. He then produced the email's full headers, routing chain, time, IP. My turn. I submitted HR meeting minutes. In bold, interns may be deployed at night if necessary. Then I placed 2 certified mail receipts. I demanded my wages in writing. No response. The judge wrote, gap between policy and practice is evident. Minutes and logs corroborate. Rebecca fell quiet. That quiet felt like the return of every silence I had swallowed. Reassess. In the hallway, Rebecca met my gaze. Last chance, she hissed. Settle, stop embarrassing yourself. I smiled. Embarrassment is lying when the records speak. Back inside, the expert issued an interim, unpaid hours, late-night emails, system matches. The judge, full report in a week. Rebecca blurted. My client acted in good faith. The judge cut in. Good faith doesn't send emails at 11:47 p.m. My heartbeat leveled. Fear had left. Only the clarity of my steps remained. Closing statements. Rebecca opened with, plaintiff is emotional, then shut her folder, nothing new left to say. I stood. Your Honor, I brought data, not feelings. hashes, logs, minutes, receipts, all point to one line. I worked and was unpaid. I kept it spare, setting each exhibit like a stone. Justice speaks through my voice and my proof. The room held its breath. Rebecca sagged into her chair. I understood then. Arrogance shrinks when it runs out of sentences. A week later, the report landed. Amount, interest, methodology, page after page. On hearing day, my mother waited at the door. "Do you want me with you?" she asked. I smiled. Today my voice wants to walk alone. Inside, the judge opened the file. Rebecca lunged one last time. Settlement. He shook his head. Too late when the evidentiary net is this tight. He turned to me. Anything to add? Yes, I said. What was taken wasn't only money. It was time and respect. Today, we're closing not an accounts unit, but justice. The judge raised his pen, ruling next session. As I left, a thought settled. Waiting is no longer fear. It's the quiet of completion. The day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, students, even some of my old co-workers filled the back rows. The air was heavy with anticipation. Judge Harrison opened the file and adjusted his glasses. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Olivia Carter. Sterling Enterprises is ordered to pay unpaid overtime wages, with legal interest and costs. The words echoed through the room. My heart pounded against my chest. I glanced at Rebecca. Her mocking smirk was gone. Her lips trembled, but no words escaped. In that instant, the entire journey crystallized. She had once told me, "You have no lawyer." Now, her own words were stuck in her throat. My mother embraced me. "Olivia, your voice was enough," she whispered. Tears ran down my cheeks, but this time, they were tears of triumph. After the verdict, people came up to shake my hand. "Your courage gave us hope," they said. I only smiled. Inside, there was a weightless feeling I had never known before. I was no longer someone silenced, I was someone heard. Rebecca's name, however, began to unravel quickly. Newspapers ran headlines. Prominent lawyer loses to unrepresented plaintiff. Her career had cracked wide open. The eyes that once looked down on me with disdain were now swallowed by her own shadow. That evening, back home, I opened my notebook and wrote a single word: voice. Because that was what carried me here. Not money, not status, my voice. And now I understood. Being silenced always, eventually, becomes an echo. Weeks passed. Invitations started coming from universities. I shared my story with students. I told them, one day, someone will tell you, you have no lawyer. But remember, if you have your evidence, if you have your voice, justice will stand with you. The applause filled the room. Rebecca's name faded into silence. People stopped mentioning her. But my story lived on in the memory of others. In the library, a woman approached me and said, "I read your story. Now, I will fight for my rights too." That was the moment I realized what I had gained wasn't just money. I looked up at the sky and took a deep breath. A single sentence echoed inside me. I had no lawyer, but I had my voice. And now, that voice lights the way for others too. One morning, I found an official envelope in my mailbox. Sterling Enterprises had sent confirmation of compliance with the court's ruling. Inside was a check, the wages I had fought for, finally mine. Tears welled in my eyes as I held it. But then I smiled. This wasn't a prize, only the return of what I had earned. That day, on a fresh page of my notebook, I wrote one word in bold: justice. Because this story had never been about money alone. Justice was won not through speeches, but through documents, patience, and persistence. Rebecca Shaw's name still appeared in newspapers, but every headline told of her downfall. Lost to an unrepresented plaintiff, they mocked. For me, it was never about her defeat, it was about my rise. Weeks turned into months. I accepted a new job offer. On my first day, a small note waited on my desk. Welcome, Olivia. Here, your voice matters. My throat tightened because the greatest reward is having your work recognized. One day, I passed by my old company and glanced through its windows. The halls that once weighed heavily on me now felt foreign. Inside, there was no anger, only peace, because I no longer belonged there. When my mother hugged me, she said, "You didn't just fight for yourself, you opened the way for others." That one line felt like the perfect summary of my journey. At a university conference, I spoke to students. I had no lawyer, I said, but I had evidence and my voice. Sometimes the strongest weapon is simply speaking the truth out loud. Faces in the audience gazed at me with admiration. Rebecca's name had vanished entirely. People had forgotten her. But my story had become a lesson for others. A student approached me after, saying, "If I'm ever silenced, I'll rise like you did." Tears filled my eyes. Because this story wasn't just mine anymore, it was a path for others too. I opened my notebook and wrote on the last page, "I had no lawyer, but I had my voice." And that voice can change even the world. A year had passed since the verdict. My life had found a new rhythm. I was more confident, my steps clearer. Walking down the street, people sometimes recognized me. "Aren't you, Olivia? We read about your case." It was inspiring. At first, I blushed. Then I realized this story wasn't only mine, it was their hope too. One afternoon in the library, a middle-aged woman approached me. "My rights were violated too. I can't afford a lawyer. After reading your story, I thought maybe I could make it." I explained how I had organized my records, how I preserved dates. A light sparked in her eyes. In that moment, something stirred in my heart. My victory wasn't just money, it was giving strength to others. Rebecca, by then, was already forgotten. Her name had vanished from headlines. But my story still lived on people's lips. I appeared on television for an interview. The host turned to me and asked, "How did you stand so strong without a lawyer?" Cameras zoomed in. Because silence was costing me more than speaking ever could. I said, "I had no lawyer, but I had evidence. And most importantly, I had my voice." Perhaps thousands watching placed themselves in my shoes at that moment. My story wasn't just a workplace dispute. It was the story of everyone belittled and ignored. When I left the studio, my phone lit up with dozens of messages. One father had written, "My daughter watched you. Thanks to you, she realized she shouldn't fear injustice." That was when I knew my words echoed not just in a courtroom, but far beyond the screens. One evening, I went for a walk with my mother. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. She stopped and looked at me. "Olivia," she said, "once they told you, you have no lawyer, but now your voice has become a lawyer for others." My eyes filled with tears, because my path truly had evolved into something greater. Back home, I opened my notebook. I remembered the first word I had written, voice. Now I added a second, justice, because one without the other was incomplete. My voice had called for justice, and justice had amplified my voice. Rebecca's name was now just a shadow, but my voice was still here. And with every echo, it grew stronger. 2 years had passed since the verdict. My life had taken on an entirely new rhythm. I wasn't just walking my own path anymore, I was lighting the way for others. Young people wrote me letters saying, "Your story gave me strength." Some had already won their cases. Others were still fighting. They all echoed the same line, "I won't give up my voice." One evening, as I checked my computer, an email caught my attention. The sender was a familiar name, an old coworker from Sterling Enterprises. "Rebecca Shaw is no longer here. Her name has been erased from the company entirely," it read. I stared at the screen. In that moment, I understood. Her name had been forgotten, but my voice lived on. I received an invitation, an international conference. The topic, justice and the power of the individual. When I stepped onto the stage, hundreds awaited me. My heart raced, but my words were clear. Once, they told me, "You have no lawyer." But I learned this: evidence and voice are the strongest defense. When they try to silence you, remember every silence eventually becomes an echo. Applause thundered through the hall. The hope in people's eyes placed a new duty on me. I was no longer just Olivia Carter. I had become the voice of everyone who had been silenced. One evening, sitting on my balcony, I opened my notebook. On the first page, the word voice. Somewhere in the middle, the second, justice. And now, on the last page, I added a third legacy. Because this story was no longer mine alone, it belonged to future generations as well. Rebecca Shaw had long been forgotten. Her name faded like ash from a fire. But my voice kept echoing in lectures, in speeches, in books. I looked up at the sky, and one line filled me. I had no lawyer, but I had my voice, and that voice has become a legacy. Years had passed. It had been a long time since that case, but sometimes I could still smell the courthouse corridors. I remembered Rebecca Shaw's face under the fluorescent lights, looking at me with disdain. The same line always echoed in my mind, "You have no lawyer." But now, those words carried a different meaning. That contempt had opened my path. If she hadn't spoken them, perhaps I would never have discovered the strength of my own voice. Sometimes, the harshest blows open the doors to the greatest awakenings. One evening, I walked with my mother at sunset. Years had passed, but her pride was still as fresh as the first day. "Olivia," she said, "you fought for your rights, but in truth, you fought for all of us." I stopped and gazed at the sky. Between the orange and purple hues, one line flowed through me. Justice doesn't begin with lawyers, it begins with courage. My mother held my hand. In that moment, I understood. This story hadn't ended with a case. It had become a legacy I would carry all my life. I opened the last page of my notebook. The first word, voice. The one in the middle, justice. And now, on the final line, I wrote, freedom. Because at last, I was free from the chains of contempt, from the weight of silence, and from the shadow of the past. Rebecca Shaw's name was forgotten, but my voice remained. And I knew now I had no lawyer, but I had my voice. And that voice didn't just change one case, it changed my whole life. If you liked this video, please comment and subscribe.